Masha, thank you very much for joining us in Time to Show Up. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, today I'd like to start in a slightly different place, which is to ask what would be, in your mind, a successful outcome from today's conversation? What would you ideally like to come away with from this deep inquiry hot seat session?
Well, the session and what's going to happen is still a bit of a mystery to me. So it's hard to think of a good outcome, but I always think that any new idea or something that I haven't thought about before um, is a good outcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of things like professional goals, are there one or two specific goals that you would like us to help you get closer to achieving?
Um, I think so. I think I struggle with, I guess, internal motivation for kind of intrinsic motivation for my job. Kind of pushing myself rather than it's a bit of a vicious circle because there's a lot of kind of um, teacher student approach sometimes from the workplace to which which kind of goes into a vicious circle of me not really feeling intrinsically motivated. And I guess also just so that for what I'm currently doing, which I'm happy to get into, and or um, kind of maybe understanding a bit more how either I can move into a career change direction or combine my career, which is quite time consuming, with some kind of side projects, which would make my career maybe not take as much of a central stage as it does at the moment.
Okay, so there's already a lot of awareness about routes in which we could approach a more fulfilling, intrinsically motivating, joyful life.
I go to therapy, so I have thought about some stuff before. So
that's great. It's lovely to see there's some readiness there. Erin, what would you like to add?
Yeah, probably just in relation to the readiness. This is kind of question about sort of like why now? What have you become aware of that's maybe a sticking point, a challenge, something that's just kind of you've decided you're not really happy to abide anymore that kind of motivated you to get in contact with us for this interview? What brought you to this moment, like that you want to punch through?
I'm not sure there's been one absolute eureka moment that I need to. I think it's kind of been a gradual building of unhappiness slash dissatisfaction for maybe the past, I don't know, 5-6 years. And to be honest, literally what brought me to this interview is my therapist shared the link with me. But I think I am kind of at a point where I feel a bit like it has been 5 or 6 years of me not feeling particularly happy or joyful. And so I'm in a moment of trying kind of any, well, not any, but solution that comes my way that I haven't encountered before. Because I feel like if I've been doing what I'm doing and it's not working, that means I have to try something else.
Okay, that's good to know. So it's been a slow build of a feeling of dissatisfaction with something that's been going on.
Yes.
And yeah, this is a very different approach from a therapy. So as we're just about to begin, that's how we're kind of framing it. If you're on board with us, then we're going to poke and prod a little bit about try and clarify, right, what this kind of underlying stuckness is, and then try and help you to release it. So if you're happy to go forward, then we'll kick it off. Yeah?
That sounds good.
Okay.
So let's begin. You mentioned joy, which I think is a really important element to how we live. And I know that sometimes, I remember, I think it was an interview with someone like Steve Jobs, and I always am a little reticent to quote people who are phenomenally unusual in terms of their achievements, because not everyone is a billionaire. But there is something interesting here. And I remember there was a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase, which is something around if you do your work and you wake up enough days consecutively where you're dreading it and you're not enjoying it, it's an indication that something's off. Now that's fine, But often we don't have access to the insights, the context, the tools that we need to be able to change our situation. And so one of the things I think I'd like to ask is, when are the moments that you have previously or in your current life now where you feel joy? And the reason I'm asking is so we can tap into some of the things that there is a passion for or a delight in or an intrinsic motivation for, even if that's quite a quiet feeling. It doesn't have to be this grandiose, oh my God, I'm so passionate about X. It's just like that kind of that flicker of delight or pleasure or meaning.
Sorry, in professional life or in any kind of aspect
It can be
of
anything.
life? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, quiet is a good one because I'm not a very joyful young adult, I guess. I guess sometimes when I'm learning new things
Okay.
in an area that I'm interested in, and I kind of feel this like filling up of like a vessel in my brain where I'm getting something new and I'm getting it, and I think sometimes I can quite enjoy kind of abstract concepts and things, and sometimes if I get to a point where it's hard to explain without an example, but where I can appreciate like the beauty of the concepts that I'm learning and kind of the mechanics of how something works, then that's kind of enjoyable. I mean, again, it's quite quietly enjoyable because I'm not ecstatic about it either, but it can be quite cool. I did a writing course this summer, and it was not perfect. It was kind of like a in-person 5-day workshop here in Paris where I live, and I kind of remember at some point feeling this feeling of like just abundance of things that can be created, just a complete almost infinity of things that can be created. And I don't feel like that anymore, but in that moment I just really felt like I was in presence of something that I could be doing forever, and it could just be completely like infinite.
Wow.
But I no longer feel that. but in that moment I did, and that was quite cool.
I just want to dig in a little bit more there, because you're talking about the beauty of concepts and this sense of there being some kind of fulfillment in it or filling up that abundance, and then being in the presence of a quality of infinity, which feels very transcendent but also very alive to me. And that's not a flicker of a feeling. Like when we're talking about infinity.
Not very quiet.
Yeah. And it can be a peaceful sense. It doesn't have to be flamboyant, but can you speak a little bit more about that quality of being in contact with infinity, and maybe what it was about the workshop that might have led to that or contributed to that in some emergent way?
I think almost by definition, where you're experiencing a feeling that you might call transcendent, when you're no longer in that feeling, it's a bit hard to describe it. So you're no longer in that state. But well, it was, I don't know if the setting helps, but it was like several people, maybe I'm just under 15, and everyone was sharing completely different pieces that they were writing. And so sometimes from the same prompt or something. So firstly, you could see how I could see how like the same prompt can just produce so many different like outcomes, and which is not to say that I liked every one of them or even understood what they were talking about, but just the idea that like people are thinking about infinite amount of ideas. And
I can ask more questions if you want me to.
Yeah, please do. I'm struggling to connect with the feeling right now.
It can be tricky.
It's been a while.
So some of the things that may or may not. Oh, go on.
Just before you do, Natalie, just
Sure.
let's also just be mindful of your struggling to connect with the feeling, right? So we want the content that you're giving us, but also this seems like a familiar thing too, right? So there was a feeling, and it's hard to connect to it. I want to hand back over to Natalie, but I want to think about that with you also.
Yeah.
But I've gone quite a lot with my talking. I don't know if you want to go on that, and I can come back to my bit after. I don't mind.
No, if you had I just didn't want to lose it, right?
Okay,
So like,
putting a pin in it.
yeah.
Okay, so yes, let's return to that. This is where Aaron does his magic. I mean, among other places too. And I go gung ho down the practical route. So some of the things that I can think of in my own experience when I've had transcendent moments where there's just this sense of possibility and expansion. And you mentioned the word possibility, and within that, creativity and variety and diversity, and not having to like the outcomes or understand the outcomes of others. But there's something about how you're describing your experience that gives me a sense of there being options and possibility and something that you haven't encountered, and that curiosity that comes up. And I wonder if part of the experience you had might have been related to that. And back to that idea about concepts and beautiful concepts and being in contact with that quite kind of, it's not just cerebral, but that imaginal space. Then there's the element of creativity, the element of prompting, that you're responding to someone. You're not having to generate in the absence of another. There's that kind of relational component. There's also something about being contained within a group for a period of time and deepening your experience over that time. So if you're talking about maybe a 15-person group and it's a five-day workshop and it's contained well and facilitated well, there's also something perhaps about the structure, about the shared intention, the sense of community, and something that feels quite different in the way that you've described the process. And I'm assuming here, so correct me if this is an assumption that's not right. But the process that you went through the workshop sounds very different to the teacher-student dynamic that you're talking about in your work. And so I wonder if anything of that,
Anything of that what?
If anything of that feels like to you, there's something here that made it more meaningful or joyful, or this element was something that was quite helpful or gave me energy or gave me a sense of that transcendent quality. If you can pinpoint any of those things.
I do notice lately in the past maybe a couple of years, that I think I am probably the kind of person who reacts best to things that I decide to do for myself, which sounds maybe a bit obvious, but it genuinely is a bit of a struggle for everyday life, because obviously as an adult you don't necessarily get to do that all the time. But I did come to that workshop by myself and kind of decided to do it for myself. So that was just something completely from me. Which is again not to say I liked every part of it, but it's like completely my own initiative that I do. I for better for worse get no like money from it or anything. So that was part of it. But at the same time, you talked about kind of community and structure. I also had a similar experience in a museum in Japan where I was completely alone. But it was this completely unique structure. There was a museum on an island called a Teshima Art Museum, and it's basically a concrete oval in which there are like two holes where you can see light coming from the sky, and there are like drops of water as part of the installation. And it's very meditative. And so even though I don't practice meditation, it's not a very huge space, and I spent maybe like an hour and a half there just sitting there, and also having that quite a similar feeling of infinity and possibility, but kind of less related to something like writing or ideas, just kind of a general feeling. What I think maybe religious people, which I'm not, would call a religious experience, but the setting was completely different. So there was no kind of structure. There was a space, but otherwise I was alone. I was not facilitated. I did come to it by myself, but I wasn't really maybe similar to the workshop. I didn't really know exactly what was going to happen. It just kind of happened. But maybe going back to what you said, Aaron, I haven't really, I don't know if it's like possible other than through, I don't know, extensive meditation, but I haven't really been able to like channel that feeling and connect with it myself, you know, as in connect with it like on purpose, you know.
Well, kind of yes and no, I would say. Like, so, okay, yes, after the fact, you haven't been able to connect to it, but it's interesting that, like, the number one concern that you brought, the first one that launched to your head, was about intrinsic motivation. And you clearly have demonstrated intrinsic motivation to sign yourself up for a 5-day writing workshop, right? That then was satisfying. And you said, when I put myself in the way of stuff like that, it feels good, you know, even if I'm not making any money, it's not part of, you know, my career progression. And it sounds like the Japanese museum too was also intrinsically motivated. So I'm kind of curious about what feels a little bit paradoxical, which is I'm not intrinsically motivated, like as a rule, is what kind of I heard in the beginning. And yet I do have evidence of having put myself into situations that actually felt quite good each time I made those choices.
Yeah, but even with that, I don't know. I'm doing an online course now, and I'm just so not connected with it at all. Like it's not also completely unrelated to my work. And I'm just bored, and I have to do a project for that, and I'm like, now that they're telling me I have to do a project, I don't want to do it. So kind of, I'm getting again more of the no, I'm not doing what you're telling me to do, and I'm bored, and I'm not connected.
Okay,
so I can't seem to spot like a pattern. You know what I mean?
Right. But let's separate the two things out, because you're still intrinsically motivated. So maybe you didn't get the outcome that you wanted from the course, but it's yet another example of an intrinsic motivation to do something that nobody's asking you to do. Right. So I just want to get clarity on that. So, like, is it really about intrinsic motivation, or is it about maybe not trusting that what you're motivating yourself to do is gonna like scratch the itch for you? Maybe, or it almost feels like there's a, because it's not entirely true that you're not intrinsically motivated. Maybe in the workplace, I don't know, but in what you've shared with us, there's definitely motivation. It's just maybe something's difficult to hold on to carry that forward.
Yeah, I think because, well, because, and this is what I try to work on in my therapy, but it's quite hard, because my main motivation, I feel like my main motivation for like a lot of things is to not be bored. And I'm just trying to do something to not be bored, but what I'm trying to find is this like deeper existential motivation that would like always be there, kind of thing. But I don't know if that's too much to ask, but like, I'm not religious, I don't have children, I'm not super crazy about my career, so I don't have those typical motivators. So I'm just poking around for different things, as you said, scratching the itch to like not be bored. And then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Sure. Well, it sounds like you might be talking a little bit about on some level, I'll check with you, right, about distraction from boredom, which I think is different from the feelings that you described and that Natalie was speaking to, which is maybe not just about intrinsic motivation, but like how you recognize where pleasure might come from, or where meaning might come from. So rather than kind of making a judgment and choosing something because it gets you away from boredom, or it seems like something to do, are you being directed by something inside which kind of says, follow the scent this way? And I think maybe both things are happening, because you have followed the scent on some of them and the scent hasn't been brilliant on other ones. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, probably. And again, so far I've been like, let's say with writing, I did a bit of it, I liked it, had a maybe transcendent experience, then tried to do some more of it, and then it just like died down. Which I'm hoping not forever, because I feel like if something made me feel, because I did it for a bit, and and I try to journal, even if it's not creative.
Did you do it by yourself for a bit? Self-directed?
Yeah. but not creatively. I did maybe like during COVID, I did a creative writing course. I've always had a thing where sometimes I would just try to vent and I would write stuff down, but more journaling. Did a creative writing course, kind of liked it, but then didn't do anything at all with it. Then started my therapy a year ago and was journaling very regularly, like very, very regularly. So I've been doing that for like a year now. And as I was journaling, I decided to like maybe take it like a step forward and do another creative writing course. So I did an online one, and then I did this workshop. And each time I do it, I like it. So it's true that I guess I need a bit of structure, because otherwise I don't know what I don't know what to do. But there is this fine line somehow between someone being like, you have to do this, and someone kind of giving me permission to be creative by giving me like a prompt, but also somehow doesn't feel pressuring. Then I'm like, okay, then I'll do it.
So one of the things that one of my good friends here, he's a comedian and an amazing poet. He's part of a poets group that, I don't know if they're still doing it, I think they are, that once a week, one person, and they do it on rotation, will submit a prompt to the group. So it could be a sentence, it could be a word. Usually it's very short. And they don't have to post what they write off the back of it into the group, but it gives them a way to be in connection with each other, to have structure, and there's a rhythm, but there's also creative freedom. And if you don't feel like doing it, no one's breathing down your neck to say, right, you've got to get this project in. And yet there's something about the combination of structure, rhythm, prompt, community that creates conditions in which they actually all do it, and they want to do it, and they find value in it. So I'm wondering if there is a constellation of factors like that: community, rhythm, creative freedom, structure, that could be accessible to you, because there are lots of groups that do these kinds of things online. It could be that there's a meetup that happens in Paris where maybe once a month creative writers come together, just to give you these rhythms, these anchor points where you carve out the time to show up for yourself with that community and creative invitation to then also feed yourself. Because I think one of the things that I've noticed creatively is it can be quite difficult to constantly generate when you're alone, without structure, without prompts. We're relational.
Yeah.
And creativity is relational. And even the infinite is relational, because we have a sense, however it might be, of the infinite, because we know about the finitude of our own lives. So everything exists in relationship to something else. And so my sense with the creative urge and with finding that sense of joy and meaning, and sometimes it's not going to be joyful, it could be heartbreakingly meaningful in a creative context, that finding a way to have that structure and these anchor points can actually give you access to yourself, to your creativity in relationship to those others.
Yeah, I think I agree. And even my therapist has suggested this already, some kind of like writing groups. I haven't tried it a lot. I tried it one time, but it was I wouldn't say it was an unsuccessful experience. I just had this one piece of feedback that I think hurt me so much that even though I know I should have come back, I then just like didn't. Like the guy read like my short piece of story and he's like, yeah, no, this is good. I mean, I fell asleep on page 1 and came alive on page 5, like by the end. And I was like,
wow.
Okay. And then they just like ripped it apart. And like, I know like it's, that is like how it should be, like the whole criticism and everything. You critique more like, right, criticism. But I was just like, oh dear God, like this is a bit brutal. And then even though I know I should have come back and actually I should have gone and perfected the story and like rewritten it, because some of the feedback was actually good,
But it depends why you're going. Are you going to get better and to be critiqued, which is one kind of thing, or are you going for self-expression and for creativity, and you just want to have, and you can have both, or one or the other. But it's also about what is it that you want from it.
Well, I think you need to be critiqued.
Do you?
Because I think I don't mean it to criticize, but I mean critique, like to give, and critique I feel like can be kind of both positive and like negative, right? Well, constructive, like you can say, I really like how you did this, would have been interesting to like see this. And actually I did experience a good way of it, I think, on the online course, because I think we were also very careful to like not hurt each other. That everyone was very respectful with their like critique, and it was like, oh, really interesting how he did this. Would have been interesting to see more about how this character interacts with this one, like whatever. I think it's good for improvement if you because
it is. Let me come on behind. I think that's right. Like I think that's right. But I think what Natalie is kind of pointing to is that there are also that when you're growing. So imagine that you're growing a sprout of creativity, right? Like you've like planted the seed and you want to nourish it, right? It might be, and it might just have been the tone or this particular thing, but too early a critique can kind of blow the sprout down, or dry it out or whatever. And that there is, and that sometimes our superegos come on board and they say, I'm not just playing with my creativity, it's got to be good, right? It's got to be critiqued, it's got to be done correctly. And there's a real argument for playing first, right? So having the opportunity to explore and play, let the sprout grow strong enough that it's ready for critique, and then you opt in there. Or like you said, you choose something that's culturally more sensitive, so it doesn't get blown over, but you're getting kind of what you need. And I also want to say, again, you've had this like clarity. So there's this, you kind of know what works for you. You kind of know what serves you. You kind of know what doesn't. You actually do make choices to put yourself in the way of that. I think there is a kind of maybe too much of an expectation that the transcendent feeling will come with the behavior. And when it doesn't, you kind of want to give up on it. And I think they don't tend to come together all the time. But if you stick with the behavior, you increase your chances of the transcendent feeling to come. So I'd want to also unlink that expectation in your head. And that if you can find the right expression, the right support to keep you there long enough, even when you're not feeling transcendent, you start to open up the space for transcendence to happen without also making it something that you have to get better at really quickly with critique and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's what I mentioned in the initial answers that I submitted to you. I do feel like I struggle with doing and sticking with things, because I can be like initially excited, but then once the initial excitement is worn off, I'm super quick to drop it, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not interested anymore. And then I actually find it very hard to pick the same thing up. Like now that I haven't written like creatively in like a few months, I actually almost feel like it's unimaginable that I can, which is very sad, but it's,
I think my experience has been, and this is just my experience, other people might have different experiences of this. For me, the only way through that is to just go and do the thing.
Yeah.
This is literally it, because
I know.
The mind follows the action, and especially when it comes to creativity, it's like you turn your back on the river and then suddenly you imagine that the river's not there, and all you need to do is physically turn yourself around and get in. And that can be as much as like a 10-minute Sunday morning writing session. You just have to put your toe in. You just have to reconnect with that flow in some form. And Erin, like, interject here if you think that we're going too early to this other place, but I'm very interested to find a link between, or relationship between, the creative writing and that kind of creative space that you also described when you're in that amazing exhibition or museum in Japan, to make a link from that kind of universe to the universe of your work and what's missing there, and whether there's a way to find that creativity in your professional life, because that was one of the key things that you mentioned at the top of the conversation that's a challenge right now.
It's been a challenge for a while. I don't really know. I feel quite, I feel like a lot of my problems are coming from or at least my relationship that I've developed with my work. And
what is your work, just so we kind of have a sense of...
sorry. So just to give a setting, I'm I'm a lawyer in the commercial law space, and I'm doing investment funds formation work right now since maybe a couple of years ago. Before I was doing something else, I've had a bit of a change, and it's and again, I mean, I don't know if you've come across many lawyers, but there are a lot of kind of stereotypes and perceptions and things, but it is not, at least traditionally, a very, joyful career. And there are a lot of, expectations. There's a lot of kind of old school elements, a lot of hierarchy, a lot of things that kind of go, well, you might say almost directly against like the kind of, free spirited, creative, intrinsically motivated, like not being scared of trying things and not being scared of failing. Like when I realized that actually a lot of people think that failure should be a good thing and you should try it. I was like, since when? I've always been taught that it's a bad thing. Like, no, no wrong answers, So it goes directly against quite a lot of things. It feels like that I might want to have for myself.
Can I ask how you found your way into a career that feels, and we don't know whether it is, we can explore that a little bit, but that really feels like a mismatch to an internal spirit that feels a little bit more freewheeling and a little bit more independent minded?
The thing is, it's not a complete mismatch because I have these like conflicting needs. One of kind of pleasure and enjoyment and freedom, etc. And the other one there's also quite a strong need, is the need for safety and security. And this job like fulfills this need quite a lot. And that is kind of how I'm really gonna say fell into it, because basically I was studying in university and I needed a job to stay in the country. So I didn't I never knew what I wanted to do. I was always I kept thinking I'm too young, I'll get there, but now it's been like 12 years or 14 years. I'm still not
this
really
is
there.
actually really good. This is really good to hear. I know it doesn't feel good to be in it, right? But you're kind of drawing a picture where, because of various limitations, visas, life situations, right, you kind of moved into, in fact, Madeline and I just did an interview earlier in the week about something similar, someone going into work because that's kind of how things fell into place, but wasn't really intrinsically motivated by, the fullest expression of the self. And generally what happens after several years of that, if there's not enough nourishment, it starts to feel like you're describing, which doesn't mean it's necessarily a mismatch, maybe, but it does mean that it's been extrinsically laid out for you, right, rather than intrinsically pushed forward. And that's why I think you kind of came with this, I want it to be intrinsic. And from our conversation so far, like, it's definitely there, and it may or may not be able to be expressed in the workplace. That might be a question for further down the road. But if you can practice finding it outside or inside the workplace, it'll start to gain a voice that can start directing you for maybe some choices you may or may not want to make later down the lane. So I'm kind of saying, like, say we take, I'm going to say it's Natalie's approach, but it's not strictly, because probably be my approach too. But say we take Natalie's approach and we kind of develop almost like an independent curiosity around writing, because that's the thing that kind of shows up, right? And you may or may not feel it every time, but you develop a practice. And then if you develop an ear for what motivates you in there, you play around with that a little bit more. You start finding your love and your flourishing and your creative spirit. You nourish that, it'll start to direct you around work as well. But maybe the big question about, like, the big questions about work, right, are so daunting that you need to step back from that and listen in to these sprouts that might be growing and let them start to inform you right? They're not growing. That's why it hurts a bit. That's why you're bored, right? It's like they're kind of like, I want to grow, and there's not enough sunlight, there's not enough air, right? So you're like, oh, I'm frustrated. So maybe you can't answer that question in work right now. Maybe you can, I don't know. But like, you can probably start answering it outside and getting enough of that to change the balance a little bit.
Yeah, that's I'm trying. That is what I'm trying to do. But yeah, sometimes it's just that is kind of the thing that I'm struggling with is it is not. I know people say like, yeah, like I'm a lawyer, I don't have time, I don't have time, I don't have time. It's not even so much like the time. It's that sometimes I come back like I feel like when you've been sufficiently down, even if you technically have the time, you're not going to use it. Like there are so many times when I come home and technically I have the evening, but I'm not really using it to do anything like joyful. I'm literally using it to watch a show I've seen 5 times already. So that's it's like technically I know I should be doing all those things and but then it's like I don't feel like the mental strength to do it sometimes because I'm just too exhausted, like physically and or mentally, especially if it's mentally, to be honest. Like if I'm really upset, I don't want to do any of that, you know?
Yeah, it's like a torpor that comes over. Like once you've expended all your energy in the workplace, there's very little to find to,
But I wonder, because there's also, and I hear what you're saying, because I feel the same. I don't want to go in pains at the end of the day. I'm knackered. But I think there's also a question of, if you think about when in the week you have a greater sense of energy or motivation or focus, do you notice a rhythm to your week where perhaps it's on the weekend or perhaps it's a Monday or, I don't know, different people, it's different things, where you have a little bit more fuel in the tank, let's say?
No, I feel like I'm so unfocused. I really feel like I feel like I'm always doing things in like short spurts. I cannot really do like a solid session. I'm not that kind of person. I have to do like short spurt because I really have to. And then I take a break and then I'm like, oh, I'm done. Like, I'm tired now.
And this is related to work or in other things as well that you do outside of work?
To be honest, both, I guess. I mean, like, let's say if I'm reading, I can't really just sit there and read without a pause. Like, I have to check my phone. I have to, like, I think of something, and so I Google it.
So there's like a restlessness.
Yeah, like, I'm always, and sometimes I even, like even when, well, I'm not doing it right now, but sometimes I'm, like, FaceTiming with someone, and literally on the background, I'm scrolling something else.
Right.
And it's so like,
I think we're back to boredom a little bit, and we're kind of back to attention a little bit here, I think.
But it's not even satisfying the boredom because the scrolling is so stupid. Like it's
right.
not.
So you have to really swallow that now, right? Because what happens in the torpor, right? What happens when you come home from work and you're tired and you watch something that you've watched 5 times already? You're fooling yourself in that's kind of what you want to be doing, but in actuality, it doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't solve the boredom. It's got a kind of sourness to it.
Well, the watching something you've seen before, I guess it has different purposes. Sometimes boredom, but sometimes, they say like for anxiety, people find it comforting. Like sometimes I know I only have the mental space to watch something very warm that I've seen before. You know what I mean? Like,
okay, and that feels different, right? So you might want to make it, when you're making a decision to regulate down or to calm, that might be the right choice. But when you're making another decision that feels antsy, right, then you have to ask yourself, okay, scrolling or whatever it is. And I think what we've identified earlier is you might need enough of a structure around you to support you to start getting this done, and that you can't really rely on yourself alone to do that. And I'm thinking of something, and I know Natalie likes this too, and maybe it's something we can think about developing in the community at some point. Have you heard of The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron?
I did it.
You did it. Okay, you smile. So I guess you got something out of that, yeah?
I think I did. I think I did. It was a bit annoying, like the way she talks.
You have to take the she's like, take the whole thing, right? It's not all brilliant, but
you have to filter. I think I did it. I tried. I didn't do all the tasks and all that. I tried to do like the best I could. I did the morning pages on pretty much most days, like very, very few exceptions. Then I dropped them, though. I thought I would continue, but then I dropped them. I did a synthesis table for my therapist out of the morning pages, because there was a ladder task to highlight important things. So I did that. Actually, a lot of insights, like actually a lot of like, well, maybe it's for me knowing myself, but I could feel like looking at that table, you could get quite a good understanding of the kind of person that I am.
But I wonder if it's with someone that might help, right? To engage in a process like the Artist's Way.
With someone? What do you mean?
With the kind of thing that we've been talking about, like enough structure to support you to do it without too much top-down kind of stuff. Like an Artist's Way group with a couple of people where you... I'm not saying this is exactly the thing, but it sounds like... Get these things that you know kind of work, put them together to support you through that period where you kind of want to drop it.
Which I know is not sexy. This is, you know, when you're thinking about the creativity and the rest of it, you want to just get to that place and the rest of it. But actually having, like Erin says, having that container, the structure, and even if you're feeling shit and you're like, oh my God, I really don't want to go, I just want to, whatever it is, if you've made a commitment, let's say for 6 weeks, where you're going to meet up with this group, it could be in a nice cafe over coffee and all it is an hour and you're sharing prompts, whatever. Just the fact that you've made that commitment means that psychologically you're more likely to go. And that can then create more nourishment, more fuel in your tank, which then enables you to be more proactive in your own time. And it's one of the least
kind of resistance in her face, though. So I'm curious about what's coming up.
No. I'm trying to think back to whether I've had to like if I've ever had these like contexts. I mean, okay. Honestly, sometimes the group thing does come out to timing. Like honestly, like I've tried to go to a book club and like they meet at 7:30 in the evening, which for many people is like after work. For me, it's often not after work. So I've attended like flexibly, not like many times. It was actually quite nice. It got me to read books I would never have read otherwise, like literally. Sometimes I didn't even like them. Well, because I mean, someone else's picks, like sometimes you like them, sometimes you don't.
Sure.
But it was nice. But otherwise in a group, sometimes I can have like a very weird, I can have a very weird group behavior where I like step back and I just like observe what they're doing. And if I feel like they're doing well on their own, then I don't want to get involved. So I don't know, but I don't think I've had enough experience of what you're talking about.
I think you said something earlier that I think is a little bit enlightening in a way. You said I'm not the kind of person who does that. He's like, I'm not the kind of person who sees something through or something like that, and that kind of regularity. And I think that is a story that you might have about yourself in some ways that might not entirely be true, because I know that to get yourself through a law degree, particularly one that might not speak to your soul, requires quite a lot of commitment. And you have also demonstrated that you have put yourself in the way independently of lots of different kinds of things. So I'm actually really wondering, and this is where we start to get a little bit practical, that you start to run up against a story that you have for yourself, like it's not happening for me, or I'm not a group person at this stage, or I don't stick to things, I run out of steam and things. That when you run into that story, actually, you start to withdraw. And I'm really curious about what would happen. And I know this is hard and it's much easier to say in theory than in practice. And it's what everybody struggles with, particularly this time of year when their New Year's resolutions start to fail, right? It's like, what would it be like to carry on with the practice even when it starts feeling like I just can't, to kind of push through that wall a bit further?
Well, I don't know how long that would have to be, because I've had this kind of conversation with my therapist when I was talking about the artist way, and I was like, 12 weeks though, like that's long, like I don't think I can get through a book. That's 12 weeks, I have to do this shit every week, like horrible. And she kind of said like a similar thing about like the story that I have about myself, that I cannot stick with it, I should try it, or like me training for a half marathon, like which I'd signed up for in spring, so training have to be in winter. So yeah, I have evidence of like having done maybe not like short, but like midterm, like 12
Mm-hmm.
weeks, 8 weeks kind of things. But then once it's done, I'm like, done. Like,
Yeah.
you
But see,
know?
both of those things are even artist way, right? Those are like a task that becomes accomplished. And I think what we're kind of talking about is incorporating a space that's more playful in your life. Yeah. Rather than something to be completed.
Mm.
So, like, even if it's a short story, with all of the things that we've discovered that might support you to do that without the expectation that it's going to take you to a half marathon or finishing the artist's way, right? It's kind of a different way of thinking about it. It's like, actually, I might be a person who might have a hobby or an interest or something that helps my sprout of creativity grow
Mm.
as a regular practice that doesn't have an endpoint and that doesn't have to accomplish. It's like a play kind of thing. And I know that's really hard and vague, but if you can do it in a context that supports you,
Mm.
Like a
with
group, you mean?
a group, or maybe it's just a couple of people, or you'd have to think through what is the best, what is the best context that would help support me to do. If it's every week, it's going to be too much. If it's 7:30 at night, it's too late. That there's probably going to be a few factors that need to be there. There's always going to be a challenge, but just like
Yeah.
as a ritualized kind of practice, low effort, relatively low effort levels, so it's not like a half marathon kind of thing. But the aim is always like watering this little sprout. Like, what does the little sprout need that I can give it, and just watch it slowly grow and really be gentle with it and gentle with myself.
But I think I struggle with the idea that, uh, like, the play and regularity kind of thing. Like the whole,
Interesting.
well, it's like, because if I almost feel like, and I know, I agree with what you said, Natalie, that like you could kind of just do something and then you feel the feeling, but in a way I'm like, well, if I have to do this every week, I don't feel like it's play anymore.
So there's
Well, yes, because that's what you're bringing to it.
Yeah.
Right?
But I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but it's like it becomes, because I had this discussion with my previous therapist before this one, where I was like, I don't feel joy. I just want to go traveling I just want to feel something. No, I feel like I'm not doing enough stuff that's like crazy and careless in my life. I'm always like have to be so responsible and And she was just like, well, why don't you like schedule it to this? And I'm like, oh yeah, why don't I schedule carelessness for Wednesday morning? Like,
You know what? Hang on. I'm going to interject here with probably this is going to sound odd and probably a bit left field. But I'm going to go for it because I think it's a great example of what can happen when you create a container. So, do you know much about the kink scene? I'm talking about BDSM, the sort of sex scene.
Yeah.
Okay. I know some, I don't know a lot, but of what I do know, what I think enables healthy kink communities to thrive is precisely clear boundaries, clear containers, clear expectations, negotiated interactions, where once those things are set in place, there can be a surrender which otherwise would not be made possible. The same thing is true in large part with creativity. I mean, sex and eros, for me, like at its heart, it's aliveness, it's connection to life, it's creativity, surrender, it's abandon, it's many, many, many things besides. And there are clear connections between ways in which to enable ourselves to surrender into that kind of erotic space that mirror very intimately our ability to surrender into creativity. And maybe scheduling isn't the right word, but I think creating a dedicated, sacred space in which you are committing yourself to say, during these 2 hours, I have the full freedom to be creative, to take risks, to play, to experiment, to leap into the void and see what emerges. Without that boundary, without that container, without that commitment and dedication to really jump into that risk-taking space, you're going to be playing at the edges. And from what I hear from you, there is such a depth of yearning for this creativity to be present in your life that I would make that choice. You have to decide to make the commitment.
I'm thinking about it now because I I didn't really expect the conversation to go there, but I think I'm like not a very experienced with like BDSM curious person. And I have noticed that it's like, it is very weird, but I mean, actually, I think it could be quite easy to explain, but like, I'm more of a submissive person, and I am so controlling in my life, which I guess makes perfect sense, right? Like, you want to see the other side, blah, blah, blah. But it is true that it does feel very freeing, but it's like you're controlling it because you have to have the confidence that nothing that you do not want will happen to you.
Yeah.
And then it feels extremely freeing. But I struggle a bit to make the link with the like life.
It's because you have to hold the same kind of paradox, right? Like, how can I set aside time to play, right? How can I decide when I'm going to be careless? Like, I really get the kind of pushback against that. But also when you're coming from a place where play isn't happening spontaneously and carelessness isn't happening spontaneously, it's not going to if you wait for it to. So yes, it's a paradox. And also, when you hold a binary like that, like full-on carelessness, it can also be scary to the other part of you that doesn't want that. So it can be inhibiting, actually, like the all or nothing kind of thing. Like, I want to throw all caution to the wind and really be careless. Another part of you is going to be like, no, you don't want to fuck everything up, right? It's like, maybe you make that choice at some stage, but to be able to practice in the gray area, that's really powerful.
It's kind of it's a hard thing, and to be honest, I've thought about it before, actually, in the context of like relationships and sex. I'm quite, I mean, I've never had a serious relationship, and I'm quite terrified of the idea that you will have to like organize play. Like, before, I used to be like, God, people like schedule sex, Jesus Christ, like, and now like, oh my God, like, I mean, I think that is how people kind of do it, like, or at least they set aside this time. But right now, for me, if I feel like a tiniest bit of pressure, I'm like completely like not into it.
But there's the thing. It's like, it sounds like so you're talking about pressure as being applied from outside, and I get the sense that when you think about schedule, when you think about, and there's this kind of like aversion, this becomes another thing for you to have to do, to complete, that you have to check a box, that it's a scheduled thing that, but back to what Erin was saying about, if the spontaneity isn't there, if your life is such that you're working long hours, that you're so well trodden in that groove of safety and security and you can't get out of it, you have to physically move yourself out of the rut into different space for that to even be possible. Without that, nothing's going to change.
Let me add on the metaphor, and I've also got an eye on the clock here. We're going to have to like wind it down, and we want to make sure we give you what you need. But, you know, it isn't true that everybody has to schedule their sex. What is true is that when people are free and easy with it and they're having sex spontaneously when it arises, then that's what's happening. And then what can happen is that gets habituated, or people get pulled into their careers, or the relationship gets a little bit boring. In which case, exactly what Natalie was talking about before, sometimes the cure to that is that you do the behavior and then the passion comes with it. That they're not just one or the other. Like, oftentimes it just happens spontaneously, but when it's not happening spontaneously, it's just not happening. So we can't sit around and wait for this full-on lioness desire for each other, right? So let's make the time and hope it comes. And it's a similar situation. If it's not coming spontaneously, you have to trust and you have to doubt your assuredness that this isn't the way to go about it, and I never do this. And it is, put the behavior first. At least let's agree, because we're winding down, maybe, if you would like to agree, that we do kind of choose something that is a limited period enough, and you don't have to decide what it is now, right? But that might work for you to grow the sprout a little bit with enough of the context around that will support you when that pressure point comes and you're going to want to withdraw from it.
Yeah. So like a formal thing?
Well, just, I don't know whether it would be a writing thing. I don't know whether it would be, I mean, Natalie's usually better at this part than I am, like identifying what's out there that you might join, or that you might do some research or something that you want to kind of challenge this repeated experience with again. And I know you've done it before, which is part of why there's a reluctance, like you don't want to have a similar experience. But with all these things that we've identified, that, well, maybe if there's one or two other people involved, maybe if there's a little bit of accountability, maybe if it's just a smaller amount of time, you know, just like 20 minutes once a week rather than morning pages every morning. I don't know, that we kind of build
and it
something.
might be as simple as, you know, just to give some practical examples, one thing that comes to mind is if you had this workshop that was in Paris that's near where you live, reaching out to any of the people that you really like to say, it was great being with you. Do you want to meet for a coffee? Talking about the idea with them, seeing if they're up for meeting every, you know, month or week or whatever it might be. It could be making a list of, on Meetup or whatever it is, of the top 5 groups that have something to do with creativity and meeting in places that you'll enjoy. So maybe you hate the idea of a bar, but you love the idea of a cafe. Maybe the evenings at 7:30 is a terrible idea because you're not off work. But maybe there's a Sunday afternoon group. Maybe there's a group that goes hiking that's connected to creativity, to kind of test, to like really see, all right, what's the thing that actually feels good that I would look forward to doing, and then try a whole different bunch. Don't limit yourself to just creative writing that's critiqued with a structure and a project. That sounds like another thing just to do.
Yeah.
The sprout does not want a thing to do. It just wants to be watered, to get sunshine and to gently grow. And so anything that gives you that sense of kind of possibility, follow that. It's like what Erin was saying yesterday earlier in the conversation about following the scent. It's also kind of, does this feel like I'm leaning towards it? Does this feel like a shove in the back? If it's a shove in the back, like, it's a no. If it's a leaning towards and a kind of, oh, maybe, try it. And I think the first task is to do some of those things. Reach out to the people that you liked, meet for a cheeky coffee, check out 5 or 6 different groups on Meetup, see which ones are most attractive to you, try a bunch out. And then once you've put your toe in the water, see if any of them calls your attention. I think, oh, maybe I'll go again. And then maybe formulate a kind of a rhythm that you like that will be like, oh, maybe I need this once a week, or maybe I need this twice a week. It's like our morning coffee. If you have coffee, I need mine in the morning, but if I have it in the afternoon, I'm fucked. I can't sleep. So maybe your sort of ritual is just once a week, and that's plenty. Or maybe you realize you need more. And also,
like, in knowing that part about yourself where there's going to be the pushback, right? So kind of in a sense, expecting that the pushback is going to come because that's how it's been, but just kind of trying to hold it a little bit lightly, be a little bit doubtful about it, maybe subvert it a little bit. Like, here I am doing this thing. Like, if there might be information there that the thing isn't for you, but it might also be kind of a habitual withdrawal. So you don't have to like push through. You don't have to whip yourself into action. But just kind of like, yeah, there it is. Okay, that's familiar. I'm going to sit with it and kind of keep to it, you know, for a period, for a month or whatever it is, and then there's the next one.
So it sounds kind of like the suggestion is like a series of what the artist way would call the artist dates, basically.
Oh, okay.
Because you're kind of trying all this. Because I think that is kind of what it encourages you to do, like a series of like things that are unusual for you, like playful,
But I'd say go on dates so that you can find a partner, right? So try the date so you can find the thing that resonates with you, and you can carry on going on dates with other things. But if you're trying 5 things and one of them you think you can sustain weekly or bi-weekly or whatever, so it's kind of an exploration, right? I'm gonna go on some dates.
Because most of my artist dates were like just me, like so I guess it's like me going to a museum. But obviously that depends on the scene, so you're probably not going to do it like every week.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is it like you go on a date with one creative writing group and there's too much critique, right? So it's like, that's not where I want to be, but this one's a little bit more fun and it's got the right time, or this one's drawing, you know, like, let's just kind of frame it as like a period of exploration, find the one that speaks to you the most, and then see if you can sustain that in some kind of way for the fun and for the play, rather than to finish it, right?
It's a thread that you're weaving in as opposed to a goal.
So do you think if we say just popped you an email in a month's time, would you feel confident that maybe you tried a few of these and how to look around? Could we maybe agree?
Okay, well, I'm in a bit of a weird time where I'm actually in a month time. I'm changing jobs. I'm going to a new job, doing same
Oh,
thing
wow. Okay.
in another firm. So I'm going traveling for like 2 months probably.
Oh,
Actually,
nice.
So super nice. So to answer your question, technically yes, but also probably things that won't really be able to repeat in 6 months time, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Okay, but what an opportunity. So why
Yeah.
don't we
Is
just
it
say,
I was gonna ask you, is that an opportunity? Because it's like,
yeah,
okay.
it's an opportunity if you take the mindset that there's this sprout, right? And that you've got 2 months to find out what it responds to without pushing it. This is great because it's kind of what you were asking for in a way. Like, it's not set aside, it's relatively boundary, but it's not like 2 hours on a Saturday, right? It's like, I'm just going to let myself be super curious on this trip. I'm going to find out what feeds this creative urge. I'm going to grow that sprout as much as I can without pushing it, so that when I come back, it will kind of want to sustain itself. It won't be prepared to dive back into the soil. It'll be like, okay, we need to do this. Whatever the job is, we need to have enough of this to feel all right. And I think that is a really good opportunity to do that.
But how do you because I've experienced this before, and what I've had is like amazing transcendent feeling when I'm out there, and why am I stuck in this capitalist job when I come back? Which it's not like, ooh, I brought my experience with me. It's like, I'm back and I'm depressed to be back, kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can't open that whole thing now, but there is a message in that, right? If you're going back to something you don't want to go back to, then there's a message in that you're not happy there, and there might need to be some choices there. But there's also a splitting going on, which is like transcendence here and work here, when it can be a little bit more blended, right? It isn't, you can't expect to go back and find a job where you're just transcendent all the time, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to be a priest, so no.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of priests are really married, but I see what you're getting at. Because, like, if there's a split in the mind that transcendence is out there and non-transcendence is everyday life, then that can be anywhere, right? So it's not about holding on to the transcendence. It's about holding on to the possibility that actually you can experience transcendence. Maybe you experience it more in these contexts. It doesn't mean you can't experience it when you get back. It's just not that transcendence. You have to find another way. So maybe what we do is we just send you on your way, in a sense, in that you let us know when you're back, and see, having gone out there just with some curiosity, following the scent of the stuff that kind of nourishes you that way, and then see what choices you may want to make when you get back,
But yeah, please do contact me. It would be because it is interesting timing. We're talking now just before
yeah, for sure.
I go.
I think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah.
So
and it may be
exciting.
that it's just not sustainable, and I don't know this, right? It's just not sustainable for you to have that kind of work, in which case you may have to make a very difficult decision. But it might be sustainable if you're able to do it in a different kind of way and have other stuff going on in your life. That we don't know yet.
No, we don't.
But it's not sustainable to carry a heaviness with you in it every day. That seems clear.
Definitely.
So talking about feeling, we're at time, so we've just got a few minutes left to close. How are you feeling right now about the conversation that we've had today?
Good, but I need to process it, because so I've been trying to focus. I don't really remember what we talked about.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anything that worries you about what's coming up in the next couple of months, in relation to what we've kind of been talking about?
Just the experiencing the same thing that I've experienced, and kind of the idea of disconnecting so much that I cannot come back to Earth, because it's like this craving that I always have to transcend and leave, and I struggle to come back down, or I struggle to be down if I'm not up. It's so it's just I'm worried I'm gonna be why did I commit to this job now? But so yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then on not necessarily the flip side, on an integrated level, what are you most excited about in the next couple of months?
The traveling thing?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Wow, I should be way more excited. Jesus. Yeah, I've become so unjoyful that I'm not even excited about my trip.
Do you think you could be excited at the possibility of the unjoyfulness lifting,
Yeah, like
even for a period?
yeah, I think seeing so. I'm not like excited about it because I don't know if it'll happen, but yeah, the possibility is a good, like the possibility of feeling joyful or feeling free, and or possibility of like new ideas.
Yeah.
Nice food if I can get some.
For sure.
Definitely the food.
Look, I think the good news is that you have had these experiences of transcendence. You've had them more than once, which means that your organism is capable of them, right? And it's a matter of this word that Natalie just said, which is about integration. So for some reason, things got split out. It's stuff that happens out there, and that's stuff that happens in real life. And if you're able to integrate a bit more, there's no reason why you can't experience transcendence at times back at home, but also non-transcendent, but also non-miserable moments. So like, okay, presence, right? Joyish present, like there are the highs, but there's also kind of the nice medium areas. And when they get split like that, one and the other, it can be very hard to feel like you can be in the middle. And I think that's definitely the rebel possibility for you.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. And is there a step, or perhaps it's less of a step and more an approach, whatever it might be, that you might take after this call?
Step or approach. I think I need to. It's not entirely new to me, the whole idea that I am a bit too either here or there, like miserable or too happy. So the idea, of trying, I guess maybe trying to be okay with like being neither miserable nor ecstatic, because I like find it, like not purposefully, but I kind of find it so unacceptable, like, and I tend to consider that if I'm neither miserable nor ecstatic, that means that I'm miserable. But
yeah, that's a really cool insight. And I the suggestion I'd make in closing also is that maybe part of that is in this kind of avoidance of boredom, and that actually if you let yourself rest a little bit, maybe even let yourself be a little bit bored, you'll find out these other states because you're not always kind of managing them, right? And that could be something to be curious about too. Just be okay sitting here.
Yeah. So I guess, the idea of trying to be okay, I don't know, with the fact that I'm not super ecstatic about my trip, but obviously I'm not unhappy about my trip. It's really great, you know, but I'm like, I'm not ecstatic. That's terrible, I'm like, how sad, but maybe it's not sad. No. Maybe it's just because I'm not on it yet. Like, I'm not on the trip.
Just be with how you're feeling.
Yeah. So I'll try to kind of be more conscious of that.
Well,
that sounds like a pretty good plan.
Yeah. And thank you so much for really going there with us. You really went for it. And it's been a real pleasure talking with you today and diving deep together. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you very much.
And we'll check back with you in a month when you're on your travels.
It's more than a month, isn't it? You're away for a couple of months, I think, did you say?
You can check back whatever you like.
Okay. See how you're going on. All right, we'll drop you. Okay.
Yeah, it'll be good to check in with you and see where your journey's taken you and how things have unfolded.
That'd be good. Please do. That could be part of.
Well, good luck with
it. About.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks for taking the time to show up with us, Masha, and we'll check in a month.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.